People in informal settlements on a daily basis live in fear of having to go to a toilet, of having to go to collect water early mornings and during the night, because it's informal settlements. These services are communal, and that's why you hear from many people saying that people in informal settlements have been living day zero since the advent of democracy, meaning that the many services that they use are shared. You find out there's a standpipe, which is where you go and collect water 200 meters away from your house. It's shared by that particular community. Toilets themselves, flush toilets, they are communal. They're known as communal flush toilets. They shared. And I think it's important to also note that, and this is also has come from the city of Cape Town, from government, that informal settlements in Cape Town use just about 4% of the city's water. The majority of the water is used in formal housing, in predominantly urban, middle class and rich areas, and that's 60% of the city's water that is used by those types of areas. So when you talk about water wastage and saving of water, that's something that, at least for us and working with people in informal settlements, it is a priority, but it's not that much of a priority because there isn't water anywhere in informal settlements. It's very worrying that at a very high level within the city of Cape Town, there's these leadership squabbles while we're in a crisis where we don't have a mayor because the mayor has been pushed aside from dealing with this issue. We don't have a city manager. And those are the two most senior leadership positions within the city that should be leading in dealing with this issue. And so I think it's important that as citizens, we stay away from those leadership. There's factions within this party that's leading here, which is the DA, but there's also the fight between the ANC nationally and the DA in the city and in the province. And we must hold people to account, but I think it's important that party politics are kept aside from these issues. Otherwise, we won't be getting anywhere. Because now we're hearing also people from the ANC saying this is the DA that brought this crisis. While all levels of government have a responsibility to play, from national government to provincial government to local government, they all have a responsibility to play. So I think in going forward and in conclusion, again, I would say that this issue of information is really important. If by any chance we do get to day zero, we need to understand that there's potential conflicts amongst different people within our society. As I've said, different classes. If you look at townships, you have formal areas, you have informal areas within townships. And if taps are closed from formal residents, then those formal areas which are close to informal settlements are going to go and get water in informal settlements because water is not going to be switched off there. And so there's going to be potential conflicts amongst those residents within townships themselves. And so that's something that needs to be looked at, because I think in one of the informal settlements, one of my colleagues had that there was a conversation that was saying, okay, so now water is going to be shut off, and we've been trying to get electricity from these formal areas, and they've been cutting electricity that we've been trying to get. Now they're going to come to us. And so that shows that those conflicts are going to arise, are going to come out. And we at least need to be organized as people who have a base in these informal settlements to say, how do we respond once there is a crisis? And as I said initially, that the SJC was born out of a crisis, and we were formed to respond to a crisis, and where we organized humanitarian support for people who were displaced. And so we have at least that capacity but we don't have that capacity in all informal settlements across Cape Town or all sections of Cape Town. So there needs to be also a way for different civil society groups to come together to form response teams, and also different religious groups as well to come together to form those.
I'm not a theologian myself, so I'm just an ordinary believer like most of you. But to be practical, I just want to start from my own experience. The crisis we face in Cape Town really help us to think theologically and also to challenge our own theological or spiritual thinking. So that's why I want to go back where my story begins. I grew up in Chachine, in Gaza. Most of you might have traveled to Mozambique, along the Limpopo River bank, and you have heard a lot about us, especially when it comes to floods. As a child, we drank from our own well. We drank from the Limpopo River bank, and that was not a sweet water, it was a salty, because during summer, the stream is lower, and the sea hits the river, it comes in, and that is the water we drank. But more importantly, that water does not come at home easily. Someone has to go and fetch that water. In most cases, it has to be your sister, your daughter, your mother, or your grandmother. And that person actually has been my mom, who she has to go down the stream to fetch water for us at home. And while back, but I never shared this with my mom, while sitting back home, I would always think on whether mommy will come back home or not. Because the river in itself was infested by crocodiles, hippos, and then you can just name it. And my mommy has to find a way to go down and fetch the water and bring it home. And so I never shared this story with my mother, but eventually the crisis in Cape Town helped me to go back and think of the goodness of what I always took for granted. The American philosopher called Iris Marion Young, she says that there are different ways to understand what justice is. To know, and in most cases, we always define justice from our own perspective, from our own context. So that in order to understand what justice means, we need to take into account the perspective of the oppressed and their experience of injustice. And that will give us a clue. Because in most cases, what we do, actually, we present our own position and we try to justify that. But she asked us to suspend our own position, to suspend who we are. The fact that I'm a man does not give me the prerogative to define what justice is. So, knowing is another thing. To understand is something else. To know what water is, it's okay. But to understand it, what water is, something different. To know what Jesus is, to understand what Jesus is, something different. To know what democracy is, but to understand, to live in a democratic South Africa is something different. When I came to South Africa for the first time to visit my uncle, I went to Cattle home. One morning, my auntie brought water in a basin in the bedroom for me to wash, and the vase lap. I said, what is this? It's for you to wash. Eventually, outside, there were no places for ablution. And of course, there were no toilets. You have nowhere to wash. So you wash in your own bedroom. Wow, I said, is this how we wash here? In South Africa, in this wonderful land, is how we wash. I said, no, I'm just laughing at myself, because this is how we do. Of course, in the village, we had the place to wash, we had the place for toilet, but in the city, in South Africa, you could not find it. Water in itself is not water unless you consider the person who brings that water. Whenever I use the water, I always took into account my mother. If we abused water, we abused my mother. Whatever drop I left falling, it was my mom falling down. So the challenge we face gives us an opportunity to think again the way we relate and the way we see each other. If you use water abusively, you abuse the person who has no access to water or the person who has bread. So that's my theological statement. Amen.